Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Mindsets podcast. Today I'm joined by Joe, who, as you guys know by this point, is obviously going to do his own introduction, but I am your host, Angus Cook. I guess my introduction is that I've been hosting this podcast now for quite a few episodes. We've gone through loads of different journeys of extreme sports, of slightly undiscovered sports, but also some interesting kind of career paths, which we're going to have a bit of a discussion today with yourself, Joe. Now, if you're not already following, go ahead and check out @Mindsets Podcast on all of the forms of social media. But without further ado, Joe, do you want to take over and introduce us to you?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Joe. I am 27. I'm a financial advisor in London.
Amazing. So we've obviously known each other for a little while. We actually met back at university. We were just talking before this about how it feels like it's been a little while. In actual fact, sadly, that was actually quite a long time ago. We were at university. So we've actually known each other for near enough 8 years now. And a lot has changed, really, I think, for both of us since we first got to know each other. But you're now a financial advisor. And before we get into talking and giving people advice or anything like that, I think it's worth us doing a bit of a disclaimer. It's the classic thing, but obviously with your own money, you need to do your own research. You can't take any other advice and take that on directly. You probably have a bit more of a legal disclaimer that you can say.
Yeah, so to be honest, I think a lot of this is going to be educational, but it is worth just saying it is worth speaking to a financial advisor should you make any financial decisions. And obviously, if you are investing, your money can go up and down. So, yeah.
And I have seen that firsthand with my own money and my own stupid decisions. So do take everything with a pinch of salt. But I think today something that would be really interesting is Joe's someone I met through sport and fitness. You're still actively involved in sports and fitness today. But also, the reason that you are a financial advisor, I find particularly interesting. So do you want to shed a little bit of light on why you're a financial advisor for one, but also why specifically you feel the need to give the sort of advice to the sort of clients you have?
Yeah, of course. So the average advisor in the UK is 57 years old, which is quite old. And it actually means at the moment there's a problem with the fact that there's not enough financial advisors in the UK to give advice, because a lot of those advisors are actually going to be retiring in the next few years, and it's leaving a massive gap. So it's actually known as the advice gap. It's a known problem.
I, again, still wouldn't take my advice of what I should do with my money in terms of what I spend it on, what's available today based on the markets today. I'd find it very difficult to trust someone that hasn't necessarily got the same understanding of things like social media and technology that I do, because I ultimately feel like I maybe have a better understanding of the pricing related to that than they might do just from the exposure that I've had as I've grown up, essentially. And that's really where your generation of financial advising comes in as a use for not just people our age. But yeah. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, no, you absolutely are. I think so essentially what I identified is there's a lot of people that make money in very interesting ways. So really good example, I have a friend that does Google ads, and I know that, I suppose it's not a conventional way of making money, and especially when you've got all these old advisors that are used to bankers, lawyers, accountants, like very kind of standard jobs. They struggle to get their head around what people are actually doing. And I think it leaves those people maybe a little bit misunderstood, because I don't think they have anyone that actually understands what they're doing and understands the way they make money. And I think it's a massive problem, because especially at the moment, like, think about all the people that are influencers. That's a great example. That is not a traditional job. That's also a hard job, because you're essentially, I can imagine you're essentially self-employed, or most of the influencers I know are. That's tough. Like, there's so many things you've got to think about. And yes, you can implement the standard kind of things that you would with self-employed people, but I just think there's additional needs there, definitely.
I see that. And I think with the sort of changing markets of social medias and influencers and their use, obviously it's kind of blown up in like the last 10, 15 years, where actually I would say that most companies do a lot of their marketing through influencers and social media rather than paying for big adverts on billboards so much and paying for, you know, a space on a newspaper that comes out every day. Whereas that was the traditional thing. So you didn't have a need to be paying people to take pictures of themselves or do videos of using certain products because there was no real, there was no consumer for that back then. So having kind of a newly created career means that there should be newly created advice, and there's a bit of a lag based on that gap. Now, it's worth mentioning that this isn't necessarily going to be an easy topic for the fact that we have already given a disclaimer. Joe can't give anyone here personal advice unless you're actually a client of his, and we'll get to that as well. But what I want to do is, obviously, as I said, we got to know each other about 8 years ago through sport. And you've actually gone through a bit of a journey yourself in figuring out what you wanted to do career-wise, but also figuring out what you want to do sport-wise. And I think there's a few applicable things to talk about on this journey. So before we get into talking money and money talks, I kind of wanted to throw it back a little bit and give people a bit more context to who you are. So you might have already figured it out for those good-eared people. That's a really strange way of saying it. But those with good listening, good hearing, that's what I'm going for. Joe's got a Mancunian accent. Is that right?
I do. I've lost it a lot.
Well, not as much as you think you have, but I'm sure people in Manchester would say that you've got now like some southern accent.
Yeah, so it's quite funny because when I go back there, everyone tells me I sound posh and like I'm from London. And then when I'm here, it's blatantly obvious that I'm from Manchester. So basically, I just don't really belong anywhere.
Well, so your background is, you know, you grew up in Manchester, but you do also have some African flair.
I do, yeah.
Do you want to run us through that?
Yeah, so like my dad's from Tunisia, and I spent a lot of time like growing up there in the summers, especially like, I mean, during the summer holidays. Like that was such a dream. I've got a lot of cousins as well, and they're all around my age as well. So it was nice to grow up with them, and I think just experience something different as well. I think having exposure to like different cultures is so important, and I think as well it just gives you another level of understanding as well. I think it's quite fascinating because I've obviously grown up with like British culture but also kind of Arab culture at the same time. So I really see where they actually like intersect. And what's quite interesting about that is I think a lot of people think that we're actually miles apart. And I really don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of cultures that are misunderstood. And I think probably Arab North African culture is probably one of them.
One of the things I noticed when we first met is there was definitely something different about you because you clearly had almost like two understandings of the same situation going on each time. And don't get me wrong, I remember, one of my first memories of really talking to you was when we were in the gym at university. And I remember that while you were this very, very calm person, and you still are this very, very calm person, what you're actually listening to in the gym was the most manic thing, and you had the most outrageous, arguably discontinued pre-workout you were using.
I know, I remember exactly what you're talking.
I remember you were like, you were 100%, but then also like so calm at the same time. And I was like, this guy's really interesting. And then we got on really well. We trained together quite a lot. Obviously, back then, for those of you that already know a bit about my background, we were doing American football. We were both very new to it. I've seen videos of us back then, and it's actually quite embarrassing what we were doing. But in terms of training, we took the training pretty seriously.
We did.
And what I want to know is, we met in the gym, but was the gym what you were kind of doing always up until that point, or did you play other sports before you got to university?
Yeah, so I was... I was a swimmer, essentially. But how that started is quite interesting. So I came home from school once when I was about 7 years old with a letter. Well, actually, no, not a letter, like a leaflet for a triathlon. And I kind of remember this, but my mum always loves to remind me of this. I came home with a letter, with a leaflet for this triathlon, and I said to my mum, yeah, I want to do this. And my mum was like, what? Like, you want to do this triathlon? I was like, yeah. And so like maybe 2 months later, I went and did this triathlon, came dead last because I was so bad at swimming. I was awful at swimming. I had like a really old little mountain bike, and all these kids turned up with like, I suppose like racing bikes that cost a lot. And I was just on my little like mountain bike from Halfords that was like really clunky. I mean, it was a great bike for like rocking about on, but probably not for racing. And I was okay at the running. I was quite good at running when I was that age. So that kind of brought me back, but it wasn't enough to get me out of last place, unfortunately. And what was interesting about that is I decided to join this triathlon club after that event. And someone said to me, I think you should go to like a swimming club to get better at swimming, because you could be like okay at it, like you're all right. So yeah, I ended up going to a swimming club, ended up taking swimming quite seriously, and it just turns out that I just started to like swimming a lot more, and I just seemed to be a lot better at it as well, considering it was something that I was so bad at one point. I just decided to go kind of all in on swimming basically.
Cool. So why, when you got to uni, were you not swimming?
So I got to university, and if I'm honest, like I just wasn't good enough to get in the swimming team. I wasn't. And obviously that's quite hard it's hard to take. I think especially when I suppose you've dedicated your entire like teenage life to doing it. Just not being good enough is pretty savage, to be very blunt.
Did you turn your back on it completely, finding out? Or did you still train and in the hopes that eventually you'd get there?
What, when
you found out that you weren't good enough to be swimming for Loughborough University?
Yeah.
Did you just turn your back on the sport for a while?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I couldn't even watch it. Like I literally hated it. Yeah, it made me feel like sick.
Just because you knew that.
Just because I knew I wasn't good enough. Yeah, I absolutely hated it, and that's when I started playing American football, because I was thinking, what other sports can I do? What will I be good at? And I don't even actually, I'm not entirely sure where it came from, but I think I was watching like YouTube videos, like literally thinking like, just trying to figure out something that I could do, because I think sport had just been a part of my life for so long. I wasn't willing to let that go at all. I had to be doing something. And so I went to the American football trials. And well, actually, no, it wasn't the trials. It was, I think I missed them. I think it was actually a session maybe 2 weeks after you'd all done the trials. So I literally turned up, had no clue what was going on, and was just trying to I suppose join in.
Yeah, I think when we first got to know each other, I was obviously trying to play quarterback, and you were a receiver, so it made sense for us to hang out, and I'd throw to you, and we'd work on some stuff, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And now I thought, we were going to change the course of Great Britain being known for, and Tunisia being known for American football players. Yeah. But then before I knew it, you had unturned your back from swimming again. Yeah. So how did that happen? Because if you had such a negative relationship with it at one point, where you genuinely felt awful just watching it, how do you suddenly reignite that spark that you had?
So it was actually the summer after that year when I'd been playing American football. Obviously, I had a great time, really enjoyed it.
It's all right, you left me, I'm over it, that's fine.
It wasn't you, mate, don't worry. But Yeah, so I ended up I think I just started swimming for like a bit of fun, just like kind of training. And the thing is with, I suppose with like something like that, you don't like, in my head, there's not really a way to have fun with swimming. You're either training or you're not training.
I see that. Yeah.
So I just kind of started training again, I suppose. And then I ended up doing a time trial with like an old club that I used to swim at, just because I used to go there quite a lot and teach as well. So they knew me very well. So they were quite happy for me to just join in and just do whatever, basically. So I did this time trial and I started basically putting out like the same kind of times that I was doing without having trained for a year. And that was quite weird, because I was thinking, I don't really understand how this is like possible. I don't really understand how this is happening, because anyone that has done swimming, you know that if you've not been in the water for 2 weeks, you feel like you can't swim, because that's just the way it is. But I suppose it's different to, you can't compare it to something like athletics, because athletics, you know what the floor feels like, you know what being on land feels like.
I see where you're going, yeah.
Whereas when you're swimming, you need to have almost like the feel of the water. So if you lose that, that's really difficult to kind of get back. And the only way you can do that is just by training. So 2 weeks out of swimming and you're done. Like you feel like you can't swim. So the fact that I was doing that was the fact that I basically came back all of a sudden and did this time trial, and I was pumping out similar times. It just made me think, I just can't turn my back on this. Like that was a bad move. And I think I probably needed closure. That's probably what it was. So I ended up going to Tunisia that summer. And it's quite funny because you were actually the person that drove me to the airport.
Yeah.
Because the only flights I could get were from Gatwick.
Mm-hmm.
You drove me to Gatwick when I was going to Tunisia. And so I went there and I just thought, do you know what? I'm just going to give this everything I've got. So something I'd never considered before was swimming for the Tunisian national team. So when I got to Tunisia, I went to the capital, Tunis, and I just turned up at like the national training center with like my swimming stuff and just spoke to the coach and just asked if I could swim. And he was like, yeah, okay, fine. So I did a session with the team there. Was there for like 2 hours. Really enjoyed it. And the guy was actually quite impressed with me.
Oh, nice. Good first impression.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah, just come, like, keep coming. Like, so that was quite, I mean, that was quite a weird experience, just to go from, I suppose, not swimming at all, maybe a few months before, to all of a sudden being invited to then train with the national team. And I think that was quite exciting, because then I started to realize, actually, like, yeah, I need to come back. I need to see this through, basically. I need to go out on my own terms. I can't let someone else dictate when I'm going to stop doing this sport.
I think that's quite a bold thing, actually, that comes with the maturity of playing the sport, because ultimately sport ends for everyone someday, right?
Yeah.
Most of us, we don't like to think about when that happens. I think the other thing that's in the back of our head is that we don't want it to happen without our say. And usually people think of that through injury, but it does also come from, when you're at the professional level especially, sometimes your contract gets cut and no one else wants to pick it up. And then you feel like you're still ready to do this thing and you can't. Whereas, as you say, calling the shot and when you decide to stop gives you that closure, which you felt like you needed a bit before. So then you've now gone as well. Someone's told you you're not good enough, and now all of a sudden you're good enough on an international level. Is hugely, vastly different. And don't get me wrong, I understand that the university swim teams in the UK are very, very competitive.
Yeah.
So when you came back, you actually started training again in the Loughborough pool. And what kind of happened from there with this new sort of kind of confidence, I guess, that you have?
Yeah, so I just started training on my own. I didn't want to, I don't know, I think I didn't want to really speak to, I mean, it sounds a bit ridiculous now because obviously, yes, it's Loughborough University swim team is a very good swim team. And really you should be getting anyone you possibly can from there to help you. And I think probably because I'm so stubborn, probably with what happened the year before, I was determined to just swim on my own. So I did that for about, I want to say, probably about 3 or 4 months. And that was kind of going okay. I was doing all right. And then just one day, essentially, I mean, I knew a lot of the swimmers anyway, because swimming is a small world. Everyone knows everyone. So one of the coaches was just on the side, and I don't know what it was, but it was actually something like, almost just something in the back of my head was like, just go and have a chat with him. Like, you need to just go and talk to him. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you're swimming on your own. Like, yeah, and you've not bothered to. Basically, I didn't take responsibility and just didn't bother to speak to anyone. Just thought that I knew what I was doing, and actually really didn't. So I went over to the coach and just had a chat with him and just explained, like, yeah, I'm kind of training with the Tunisian national team. Could I swim with you? And he just looked at me and went, yeah, all right then.
Simple as that.
How hard was that?
Yeah.
Just come tomorrow, just bring your kit. We're going to train at this time. Yeah. So kind of got back into one of the teams.
And then I can't really remember the timeline of this again because it was a little while ago, but I then ended up seeing you less in the gym while that was going on because you're obviously doing a lot more training in the pool, as you would expect for a swimmer.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, you appeared back in the gym more.
Yeah.
And it came with some slightly less good news.
Yeah.
And you picked up a bit of a rogue injury.
Yeah.
You were definitely the first person I had heard of this with, but you torn your abdominal wall. Is that right?
It's essentially what happens to like pregnant women.
Damn.
Yeah, so it's quite bad.
That's quite a tough one to explain. I assume it came from the swimming.
So it's actually, yeah, so it is actually quite a funny story because essentially like I wasn't really good enough to swim still at Loughborough, but I was determined I was going to make it work, and I was determined that it was going to happen. So I think because I had so much, I think people just thought that I was just a bit of a waste of time, which is fair. Because I think looking back now, I wasn't good enough to do it. I really wasn't. And I ended up just training so hard because I was so adamant I was going to prove everyone wrong. And to be fair, like I really started to pump out kind of good times. And this was only maybe like a couple of months before this happened. And I was starting to kind of get noticed to then swim for Tunisia events as well. So that would have been a game changer. So I was essentially on track to go and compete at like junior level. And yeah, and then one day I was in the gym and had a massive like lump in the middle of like my abdominal muscles. And that was a bit scary because I spoke to one of the gym people and literally showed them and was like, have you seen this before? And they just said to me, just go to like A&E now because it looks pretty bad. So I did. I thought I had a hernia, and it was quite funny because I literally walked into like the A&E in like Leicester Hospital. And I showed the woman, and I said, I think I've got a hernia. And then she went, no, that's definitely not a hernia. I have no idea what that is. But yeah, I just spent all day there. I had a friend that actually drove me there and stayed with me for about 12 hours. So Craig, if you're listening, thank you very much, because that is something that I will always really appreciate, because yeah, that was a long day. And yeah, and then just turns out like I'd essentially just split all my abdominal muscles. It was like painful to sit up. I had to sit in bed for the next like 3 weeks. I looked like I had a pot belly. Like, it was really weird.
Do you remember it? Like, did you feel it happen at the time it happened?
So
did you just notice that there was now this lump?
No, so I didn't notice this is the most kind of, that was the worst thing about it. It wasn't painful. It wasn't painful. It was like an ache, a constant ache, but you didn't feel it. Like, I didn't feel it pop.
Right. Okay.
So I think this is something that happened gradually over time from overtraining. Basically, I think there wasn't one thing that could have done it. It was pretty bad.
And in terms of like recovery,
yeah,
because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that started to drive you towards finishing swimming competitively.
Yeah, so I think at that point I just kind of, I mean, to be fair, like, I'd done everything I could at that point. If that's what it's come to, that's a pretty bad overtraining injury. Yeah, I think I knew that I wasn't going to be good enough, and the fact that I had this injury as well, like, your abdominals are a massive part of swimming. If you're not strong abdominally, you can't really do much. So I kind of knew straight away. I was like, yeah, I'm done basically. I've gone out on my terms.
Yeah. But I think
yeah,
the thing that's kind of consolidating about going out in that way is that you train so hard to get to that level. And I think whether or not you looked at it in this way, from my personal view, in order to get back to that level and continue to excel, not only do you need to be back and training at the level you were beforehand and putting in the same number of hours, but you first of all got to do a shite load of rehab.
Yeah.
To actually get your abs back to a point where you can start training normally again. And then you're probably still going to have to overtrain to be at that level of performance. So mentally, that is a massive hurdle just to get back into where you were.
Huge.
And one thing that I also remember is when you were studying at uni, it wasn't always the easiest.
No.
Studying wasn't necessarily, and I mean this in the politest way possible, the most natural thing for you to do. But given the context of everything else that was going on, in the terms of you trained for this thing, through all your teenage years, and then it's whipped away from you, and then you're discovering this new thing whilst you're also being a fresher and obviously going out and discovering what it's like to be at university. And then you're trying to do this course, but obviously the course is going on the back burner because everyone says the first year doesn't count. And then you're rediscovering sport, you're rediscovering this avenue, which is then obviously going to steal your attention away again. It's no wonder when you take that context that it would have been hard to be like studying religiously on what you're doing. And I know you go to university theoretically to get a degree, a piece of paper, but when you have so much going on in your sort of the other side of life, it does play over and have this impact, which is really where the physical impacts of what your journey was there has a huge mental impact of what you ended up doing. And as a result of swimming kind of coming to an end and you going back into the gym, all of a sudden, I wasn't there anymore, I don't think. I think I was either on placement or something.
I think you were on placement that year. Yeah.
It switched and I came back and you were suddenly like studying like mad.
Yeah.
And you came out, you got your degree and you're now a financial advisor. And not only that, we stole you from Manchester and we got you down to London. So you clearly came to sense while you were in that period of time. Now, obviously, going away from swimming, you've still kept up with things like running. We actually saw each other last weekend because we were both doing high rocks. You were doing it solo, which I'm hoping to do at some point. But I've been staying with the safety of having a friend to go around and hold my hand with as I go around. But it kind of leads us into where we are today. And going back to, again, what you do for a living, it's the current climate of today. I feel like it's a bit of a weird one. And I don't know if it's always been this way, but I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty, not just in what people do with their training. Because there's a lot of people trying to find new things and discover if they're a hybrid athlete or not.
Yeah.
But also just in terms of financial security,
yeah,
I think is a big issue for people, specifically of our generation.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot where you see stuff on the news where it's like, young people are spending way too much money on Netflix and coffees when they should just be focusing on buying their first house.
Yeah.
And there's then little regard from older generations for understanding that they could have bought their home about 60 years ago for 20p in a Freddo bar. But that's my personal opinion. But what I wanted to move into is the current climate. And you've actually got a pretty general view, because a lot of people tie things to what's going on in the government and politics.
They do, yeah.
But you like to take a slightly different approach of how to think about that situation.
Yeah.
So do you want to start shedding some light on that sort of thought process?
Okay. So things like this are quite interesting. And the reason is because I think people think that it matters so much, whereas really I would disagree. And the reason for that is I just think that if you set yourself up with a plan and you're on track for that, yes, of course, there's changes in legislation, like tax changes, for example, that will happen, but you can plan for them. But I think the worst thing that people do is they put stuff off based on what is happening in the world. And one of the most important things that I actually teach, like a lot of my clients, is be proactive rather than being reactive to events. And the reason for that is, if you're proactive and you make a plan, there's things we can do, we can adapt, we can pivot, we can change, not a problem. But what we can't do is, if you just don't do anything, might be a bit too late in terms of how you're able to go forward with it. So I think a really good example is just putting stuff away for the future. If you neglect doing that because of what's going on in the world, you're going to find yourself at a point where you've actually not really started. Whereas someone else, on the other hand, could have started. They could have tailored their plan to maybe what's going to happen. And I say what's going to happen because I think, okay, like Labour coming in is most likely it's probably going to happen.
I would agree that there's a strong chance that they're likely to take on government.
Exactly. So yes, we can almost prepare for that, but we're not reacting to that happening. We're being proactive in case that happens. If that kind of makes sense.
That does make sense. I think especially in life, it's very difficult sometimes to admit it, but we all wait for the right time to do anything.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, if you wanted to have the best pension, really, you're going to wait till you're 65 and wanting to retire to think about when you do your pension. No, you start paying into it now. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to sit here and act like I understand pensions fully. I hope to be secure enough one day that I don't even need to think about my pension. But there is a plan in place there that's so well known that you might as well take advantage of the fact that you don't have to do much of that planning.
Yeah.
The other thing as well that I think young people are constantly thinking about, and to a degree, especially if you've thought about it properly when you're young, you'll have to think about it for the rest of your life, is things like mortgages on houses.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to throw in something here that I found out the other day. I don't know if you know this.
Go on.
Listeners, did you know that mortgage translates in Old French to death pledge?
Yeah.
Which is just the scariest thing ever when it comes to signing your money to a death pledge.
Yeah.
But obviously having a mortgage is a powerful tool. It's something that I have personally feel very conflicted with, because especially with what I've seen in sort of the housing market and that sort of thing, just trying to move. I mean, everyone knows that London's going to be an expensive place to move to, but housing prices and mortgage rates and all of this has been the talk of the news for years since COVID.
Yeah.
And to a degree, part of me has always been like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to get a mortgage and own a house, because that means, first of all the responsibility, if something breaks or whatever, is mine now. I can't just call my landlord and be like, hey, so it's broken.
Yeah.
You do something about it. But also, at times, I've heard that some people's mortgage payments have been very, very similar to paying rent.
Yeah.
But you do have the full responsibility.
Yes.
And whilst you effectively have an asset at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I also like the fact that I could, come the end of my 12-month contract, just pick up and move to a different country, a different city, whatever I wanted to do, without necessarily having to think about who is going to live in that house.
Yeah.
And do I have to manage it?
Yeah.
But that's been my fear. And again, waiting to make the right decision. Now, from someone who's probably a little bit more clued up on what's going on,
Yeah.
what would your kind of advice be around topics like that?
Okay. I'm going to say something quite controversial, and I know you're going to like it.
I'm so excited.
So, okay, having a house does not define success. And I think a lot of people think that that is the case. I think there's this dream of owning a property, it's yours, you can put your stamp on it, and you're going to own it forever. And I think it's just a bit of a backwards way of thinking.
Interesting. Please.
And I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just my personal opinion. So from what I do, you're making a plan that's tailored to the individual. There's certain things that aren't right for certain people. If I said to you that I don't want to live in London for the rest of my life, I want to go and move somewhere else for at least 5 years, but I'm going to buy a house, probably not the right thing to do. And the reason is because if you're not living in it, you've got to make sure that someone's in there. You've still got to pay that mortgage. Plus, you're probably going to be paying rent in another country that you're living in. It's just not as clear as I think people make it out to be, and it has to be right for your situation. So what I would say is, like, yes, if you're going to stay in one place for a very long time, yeah, buy a house is probably a good thing to do. But I think at our age, I know that I just want flexibility right now in my life. And I think a lot of people probably do as well. Like, I'm not ready to like commit to one place in the UK forever right now. Like, maybe when I'm like 30, 35 years old, yeah, fine. But I think what's important when you're young is you're able to do the things you want. And the reality is that what you're going to want to do is probably going to change. And it's probably going to change quite quickly, because you're never going to have this time again in your life. You're never going to be able to do the things that you can do now.
I think that's obviously it's your opinion.
Yeah.
I have parallel views to that.
Yeah.
So I think I get along with that very well, and I feel the need for that freedom, because to a certain degree, I think a lot of people have to admit that we got an understanding that, you know what, sometimes life just isn't in our control. When something like COVID comes along, like the world shuts down, and sometimes you can go ahead and think, yeah, it's sensible for me to do this and buy this, and that'll be better for me in 10 years time or whatever. But ultimately, the kind of understanding now that actually we don't really know what's around the corner. It's quite nice to have that freedom, which is why I have kind of thought in a similar way. But it's good to know that not everyone is, you know, jumping on and going, right, well, I need to put money away because I need to buy a house. If it doesn't make sense for you, then maybe you don't need to be buying a house. But in terms of financial power,
yes,
doing nothing with your money,
yes,
is a waste of your money. Is a pretty well understood thing. Now, again, do your own due diligence. I'm not suggesting that anyone goes down to the local betting place and watches the horses every week, and that is the way of doubling your money. But there are some logical things that you can do in a very basic plan.
Yeah.
To sort of boost your potential buying power, I guess, someday.
Yeah.
So what sort of things are people not necessarily taking into account enough, would you say?
I think it's okay. So what essentially you need to do is you need to be prepared for anything. And I think sometimes with money you can be too optimistic. So a really good example is, okay, I know a few people that do this, and it's a really bad thing to do. Do not spend money when you're kind of accounting for maybe some more money coming in before it's actually hit your account.
Like bonuses and things like that.
Yeah, and this is a really common thing, like that I've seen a lot of people do. They'll know they're getting a bonus, and they'll have already planned essentially what they're spending on, and it's not actually into their account yet. Or they will have racked up enough kind of credit card debt to be at a point where they need to pay that for that bonus. That bonus is doing nothing other than paying off that credit card because they've decided that they're getting this bonus. So yeah,
Credit cards aren't free money, essentially.
There's a way to use credit cards, and that is not the way to use it.
Yeah. And in terms of savings and that sort of thing, getting a savings account which has got good interest is obviously a very basic way of, increasing what you're doing with your money rather than having it in a shoebox under your bed in cash.
Yeah.
Especially because places aren't taking cash so much anymore. Now, in terms of not just really what the money is in its physical sense, the impact that money has is something that you highlighted as something that's worth talking about, because financial security majorly reduces the stress of life, right? And even I think everyone feels it to a certain degree. As it gets closer to payday, we're getting excited. We're not necessarily getting excited for the things we can buy. We're getting excited for the fact that we know we can actually get home on TFL. And like the sandwich isn't going to get declined when I'm at the till in front of everyone. But being smart with your money can basically take away a sense of fear that goes on in your head. Now, I don't know if that's something that you obviously have to talk to people about a decent amount, or if you have particular opinions on that yourself.
No, I think it's ultimately like you need to look at the way money is being used. There's no point earning a lot of money just to have it. It's essentially a tool for experiences, enhancing your life, looking after your children, looking after your family, looking after your loved one, and obviously looking after yourself. It's when you start to wrap your head around that, I think it completely changes. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of people just think that having more money will just solve problems. And it doesn't at all. I think that couldn't be further from reality. And the reason I say that is, okay, I'm like, you hear about a lot of people that will say, okay, I essentially can't manage my paycheck that I get. I just spend it all. So I need to earn more money. What do you think is going to happen if they earn a lot of money?
Typically, I want to quote, I think I might be so wrong in this, but I want to quote Biggie Smalls here. More money, more problems, right?
That is very true.
So that's kind of what I see happening is you get more money, and you're obviously just going to adjust the way that you live to spend all of that money again.
Essentially, yeah. What's interesting is they will just spend just as much money, because the problem isn't the money. The problem is the way they're managing it. If you can't manage £100, you can't manage £1 million. That is the fact. And that's what people don't get, because they just assume that, well, I'll have more money, so I'll spend less. But actually, the habit's the same. The habit is exactly the same. So what I find that I'm doing a lot is actually teaching people habits and teaching them how to basically put money away for the future and where to put it and how to do it in the best way possible. And that all starts with a plan. With making an actual plan. I really think you need a plan for everything, in terms of budgeting, Budgeting is a great thing to do. It's not boring. Yes, I get it, like 2 hours of your life to sit and figure out what you're going to spend money on. But what I would say is, I think this needs to be said. I think if you're going to do a budget, don't follow someone's budget template. Don't follow what someone else tells you to do. You need to prioritize what's important to you. So I think a good example is so I will spend a lot of money on anything health or fitness. So like gym memberships, like kind of eating well, anything around that, I will actually spend a fair chunk of like what I earn on. But I'm not massive, like I don't really drink that much, to be honest. So like I won't spend as much. It makes no sense for me to have a budget to like go out to the pub because I'm just not really gonna use it. Whereas what I'm saying is you should try and shift your focus to what's important to you. Because again, money is a tool to enhance your life and enhance your well-being and your family. And that's how you need to use it. Choose what's important to you and spend more money on that. But then cut back in areas that aren't important.
Again, I think this is a more immediate example of being proactive. Like doing a budget is proactively deciding how you're spending your money.
Yeah.
And making sure that you're doing the right thing with it so that when it comes to the time where you have to make a decision, you've actually already made the decision in that sense. So it's like, if you budget for the month and you decide, actually, I want to buy this thing.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, can I? Guarantee you, if you haven't budgeted it, you'll find your way to girl math that thing into your basket, right? If you haven't budgeted it, you're more than likely to find a way mentally that it's okay for you to get that, because you'll tell yourself, oh, I just won't go out next week, or I won't spend money on this next week, albeit next week comes along and you're like, oh, I still need that.
Yeah.
I will make this work. And you'll convince yourself week by week that you're going to do that thing. Whereas if you've already done the budget and you go to that little pot or savings or however you've decided to do it, and the budget says you are 25 quid short, guess what? You're 25 quid short. Yeah. If you want to make it work, then you're going to have to move that 25 quid from one of the other pots. And all of a sudden you're actually making the decision. Whereas if you're just doing it mentally because you know you've got X amount in your bank account, then you're not actually really making any decision at all.
No.
If that makes sense. Now, I think because some people are going to be writing in with some questions, there's a bit of varied questions this week from the listener questions. Guys, if you didn't know this was a thing, get to know, again, head to @mindsets_podcast on all of the social media channels, because especially on the Instagram, there's the opportunity to get involved in each of the episodes where we do listener questions. So you can write it anonymously if you so wish, but if there is a particular topic or question that you have for one of the upcoming guests, you can get it asked right here, right now. So we're going to start off with Matty, who's coming with the first question. Now, it's maybe away from finance directly, but he wants to know who you think the best personal development people are to follow online. So that's his question. Now, before we answer that question, straight away, Matty, hi. Well done. You found the podcast. This is probably one of the best places. This is a terribly shameless plug, mid-podcast. I find pretty cool people, so you could follow them from here, but you could also just stay following here. Also, Joe's here. Joe's another good person I'd recommend following. But who do you follow, Joe?
Who do I follow?
That kind of gives you some, or feels like they're personally developing you.
Well, obviously, the Mindsets podcast.
There we go. Yeah, that's 2 recommendations in one.
So me personally, Jocko Willink, he has had a massive influence on my life, and I think it's all about the accountability and taking ownership of things. I think that empowers you to another level. I think if you're able to just own your shit, I think that I know a lot of people that don't like to take ownership of things. And what that ultimately does is it means that you're not doing the very, very best that you can do, because there's always some sort of excuse that can creep in there.
You have a quote that you like on this topic, don't you?
I
Go on,
love this quote.
shove this quote out. I love it.
So one of my favorite quotes is, I think it's actually from Buddhism. I think, so don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read. So why carpet the earth when you could just put shoes on? And I think so what that's referring to is, why would you go everywhere and expect everything to be perfectly laid out for you so that you could walk, instead of just putting your shoes on and taking ownership of your own stuff so you can just walk anywhere you want, unless you like standing on Lego.
Yeah, but I like that because it gives the perspective of, I mean, every day we put our shoes on and go out.
Yeah.
We do that so that our feet don't get fucked up by the rest of the world. But when it comes to certain situations, it can sometimes be easier to play victim a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, okay, that's interesting. So there you go, Matty. There's an example of someone else to follow. Now the next question is from someone called Ty. I'm assuming the name Ty. I'm sorry, it's the Instagram handle. That's the closest thing I can go from. So biggest errors you see in young people and their money.
Okay.
Do you want to give like one or two examples?
Yeah. And and I think as well, I think I should give one or two examples because everyone's different. You see very different things. And I'm going to pick two extremes. So on one hand, you have people that are just afraid to spend money. Like, they save everything and they live very, very frugally, and that's absolutely fine because you are going to have more money in the future. But I do think you should enjoy yourself a little bit. And like, you're not going to be this age now. This is something as well that I think has been very much reinforced by things that I've seen in my life. So I actually had a friend that died of COVID and he was 24 years old, which was pretty bad. That I think his mum at the funeral, the image of her crying is probably like the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life, by far. And what I'm trying to get at here is like, nothing's guaranteed. So yes, like, be frugal, save money, but at the same time, like, do not forget to enjoy yourself. Like, you're only going to be 20 odd years old once in your life. And then from there on, there's a chance you might not, you never know what's going to happen, basically. And also as well, what you've got to think is you're never going to have this health again, which is really important. Because when you are in retirement and you want to spend all this money, you're not going to be as fit and you're not going to be able to do the things that you necessarily could now. So it's just something to bear in mind.
That's good advice. So I guess that's one end of the extreme.
That's one end.
What's the other end then?
And the other end is literally just people spending everything. People racking up credit card debt. It's pretty common. And do you know what the funniest thing actually is? I'd say the most common bracket that I see that is people that are probably earning like over £100,000 a year. It's weird because I think, and again, it comes back to what I was saying before about having more money doesn't solve more. Like, it doesn't solve your issues of having no money. Like, it just means that you have more to spend and the habit's never going to change. And you see a lot of those people like racking up credit card debt. They don't put away for the future. And like, it's just something that you're probably going to look back on and really think like, I have no idea why I did that. Just because it means you've got less in the future. And one of the most important things about starting early is actually compounding. So Albert Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And it really is. Because it means that if you start to put away for the future, it starts to compound, starts to grow. If you leave that for a long time, that's actually going to be a substantial amount of money. And I think people don't understand how it really works until you show them like a diagram. So I actually have just a graph that I use in a lot of my meetings, and it just shows past performance of like a very basic, well, the S&P 500, because it's just the most basic like kind of fund to use. Just what that's looked like over the past like 20 odd years. And you kind of see people's faces like drop because they actually start to realize that so I think a really common thing is when people start to invest, they start to throw in like £100 and then they'll take it out again and then put it back in and take it out and move it into something else. Really, you shouldn't do that because you're not letting the magic kind of do the work. You should just leave it and just wait. Delete the investing app off your phone. Do not look at it. And that's it.
Yeah.
And check it in about, I don't know when like a reasonable time would be. I reckon probably like every 3 months is quite reasonable. That's okay. Some people might want to be every 6 months. Just like kind of look at what it's doing. Oh, it's gone up. Fine.
Do you know what I find interesting? That's obviously good advice. And I vouch for that as well. If you're not that person and you look every minute, every hour, every day, you'll soon become that person because you'll make so many dumb mistakes, which I have also done, and you'll lose money that you didn't think you were going to lose. Don't worry, I haven't got myself into debt or anything like that. But I made silly decisions amongst the whole GME, AMC situation with GameStop and that sort of thing. That I learned that I don't actually want to look at that app anymore in pure fear that I'm not going to like what I see. And even when I do like what I see, I'm now so like, oh, but what could it be? That you end up leaving it. And the longer you leave between looking, I think is a lot better. But yeah, I appreciate those two extreme sort of different ends of the spectrum. And it's kind of about finding that balance of living well. Yeah. Also maintaining the fact that you'll live well in future. Yeah. That's kind of what you want to do. So keep that in mind. Cool. So the last question is from Charlotte. And she wants to ask you, what does it take to take the risk and work for yourself?
I love this question. Working for yourself, I think, takes a lot. You've got to really back yourself. So for context, I'm self-employed, so it's even more applicable to me as well. But what's most important is when you're self-employed, you need to protect yourself. You don't have benefits that you would have if you're employed. You really need to protect yourself, and that's really important. Because again, you never know what's going to happen. And yeah, anyone that is self-employed, I would recommend just speak to someone, speak to a professional, speak to accountants, speak to financial advisors, solicitors, because you need help. Whether you like it or not, you do need help. And it's not just in terms of money, it's in terms of the full package, in terms of everything. It's very, very important. But I think it takes a lot of grit and a lot of determination, because I suppose I'm finding right now, like it's hard. The first bit is very hard, and you've just got to go through it. You've just got to do it. And I suppose it's one of those things, it's hard for a reason. The reason it's hard is because you've got more freedom now, and also because you've got the potential to actually, I suppose, design your life. And also, like, in a lot of those jobs, make more money, essentially. Because let's be real, that's why people do a lot of self-employed jobs, because you've got no ceiling. So it gives you another incentive to take the risk. And I think what you need to do, work with professionals, stick to the plan that you've set yourself. Do not start to look at other people and worry about what they're doing. Probably the worst thing you can do. But most importantly, do not just keep going. I'm such an advocate for entrepreneurship because I absolutely love it. And a lot of my favorite clients are entrepreneurs, and they're so rewarding to sit down with because they've got so many interesting things to say. And I think as well, it's the hardship that comes with it that really makes them very interesting, because they've experienced a lot. And I mean a lot. Like they've had they've had some really bad days, but then it makes the good days so much worth it. I didn't even say that properly. So much worth it. So much more worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things as well is the whole process about it being hard and it kind of putting you in those situations. Ultimately, that's molding what you become.
Yeah.
And so if you genuinely, truly believe that you're about to go out on this new venture and you're going to be the same person you are right now when you get there, then you're wrong.
No, yeah.
And if you expect that to be the case, then you'll probably give up.
Yeah.
Be prepared for you to change the process, but have your plan, and for the process to massively change you.
Yeah.
And it is terrifying, but it's also the most exciting thing you can do. And if you have the desire, like Joe has said, you will never be this healthy, you'll never be this young, and you'll never be this free again. So that's my advice. That's my life advice, not financial advice.
But I think that it's even more reason why you should do it. If you're this age, you're never going to have this time again in your life. You can take risks, and realistically, like, does it actually matter if it doesn't work out? Probably not. Worst thing, might have to move home.
Was it very
bad?
Exactly. It's not that bad. Now, we're doing a kind of reflective thing. We're giving advice to other people, but it's time for you to give advice to yourself.
Yeah.
So this is another part of this podcast where I ask for 3 pieces of advice for a younger version of the guest's self. So imagine I'm no longer the other person in this chair. It is you, not necessarily the same age you. I'm looking for 3 different versions of you, or 3 pieces of advice for a younger version of yourself.
Yeah.
What would 3 simple bits of advice be?
Okay. So, don't know if this counts, because this is what someone actually said to me, and it wasn't even that long ago, but I felt like it really helped me a lot. So this person is, I would say, like an industry leader in kind of ultra high net worth property. I can't really say more than that. But the one thing, well, they said 2 things to me that I'm going to steal for the purpose of this, because I genuinely think they have motivated me like nothing else. The first one was, be a leader. Lead, do what you think is right, because I think a lot of the time we spend so much time worrying about what other people are doing. Again, take ownership, own your shit, be a leader. The second thing was, don't listen to people that are unprepared for change. And I know that's kind of similar, but again, I think we don't think about where something potentially could go. I think we're too worried about what it looks like now. And I think it takes people to come in and be disruptors for something to become way more forward thinking. And I would say the last piece of advice is just, do not give up. Seriously, and I know that's very, very basic, but do not give up on yourself. You can do anything, and I mean anything, within reason, that you want to do. And I really think that if you want to go out and you want to be, I don't know, the best architect in the entire world, go and find someone that's already there, beg them for a coffee, beg them to go and sit and listen to their meetings and watch them draw. And I suppose I'm not really too familiar with an architect, to be honest.
Whatever they do.
But anything that an architect would do, go and beg them and literally extract as much information as possible, because my life completely changed when I started doing that. So I literally seek out like people that are in the Spears 500 Advisors, which is essentially like the Champions League for, if financial advisors had a Champions League, that's what it would be. basically, in a nutshell. I literally beg people to just go for a coffee with them. It's quite hard because I try and offer something, but in a lot of cases, like, you can't offer these guys really anything because they've got everything. And yeah, like, just, you don't know everything. And when you start to realize that, you start to understand that you need to learn from other people, and you need to learn from other people that have kind of walked the same path as you. Look at these people that are where you want to be now, and go speak to them and learn. And don't be arrogant, and don't think that you can do everything yourself, because that's what I used to do. And actually, I looked like a bit of an idiot when I used to do that. So yeah.
Good advice. I like all of those. Now, I guess the kind of last part of the podcast is the previous guest question, and also you asking a question for the next guest. So the last guest we had was Max, who comes from a powerlifting background, but his question is actually nothing to do with that.
Okay.
So what he wants to know is, what's one thing you can change about what you're doing right now to get to your goal quicker? It's a good question, Max, by the way.
Yeah, Max, that's a very good question, mate. That's a fantastic question. I like... It's hard because I would love to say I'm doing everything I possibly could to get to my goal. But there's always room for, like, you're never doing everything. There's always something. I think it's... So my goal ultimately is to, just for context, because I feel like this answer is going to make more sense. My goal ultimately is to provide advice, really good advice, that fits a lot of people that would struggle to speak to a traditional financial advisor. And the reason I think that's so important is because I think the world is changing a lot. And I don't think there's financial advisors that are equipped to deal with certain types of people. So that's ultimately what I want to do. I think I need to, I'm meeting a lot of people right now, which is great, but I need to meet more people, and I need to go and get myself in interesting circles of people. So actually, I think a good example of this is, I used to run on my own quite a lot, and I started going to Scrambled Legs, which is a fantastic group of runners. And I've met a lot of great people there. And what I've started to realize is, by going to these events, I've found a lot of people that actually really enjoy the same things that I do, which is running and running long distances.
This is something that I love, is that that networking within not even just the fitness industry, but a lot of industries is happening through fitness events. With the younger generation, specifically in London, at least I can vouch for that there's not just run clubs going on, but there's like conditioning clubs and that sort of thing going on in gyms. And the people that I've met there, the people that I'm aware of meeting each other through those things is crazy. And the only thing I can liken it to is huge conferences.
Yeah.
Where
yeah,
a lot of people, again, slightly further along in their career, will go to conferences to do their networking. And actually, having been to some of them myself, there's not a lot of young people there. And the networking that I have been able to, when I have been there for my previous job, is meeting people who probably look at me and go, wow, look at this young, fresh face that knows nothing about what he's doing. Whereas as soon as I go to an environment where I'm actually the same age as everyone else, suddenly the networking is amazing and it's really good. So I think this is something that's changing as well, as you mentioned. Well, that means that I need a question for the next guest from you. So what would you like to ask the next guest, without having any clue who they are or what they do?
So I think, if you could do anything, why aren't you doing it now?
Why aren't you doing it now?
Why aren't you doing it now? And the reason I say this is because I think a lot of people... So I think I've heard a lot of people say, what would you do if you could do anything you want? Like, you can do anything you want. Why aren't you doing it?
I think there's there's quite a few people that will immediately jump to the reasons why. But again, if you talk to someone like yourself, or, you know, someone that's actually tried to take a step towards doing the thing that they would want to do, all of a sudden, all of your excuses for not doing it will suddenly melt away, and it's quite scary, but also exciting.
Yeah.
That's really when you start to get the idea of, is it time to actually start doing more than you start dreaming?
And I hope as well, if they aren't doing what they want to be doing right now, I hope they take the jump after hearing that.
Well, I'll make sure that they listen to you. Don't worry. Amazing. Well, that rounds us off for this podcast. I'm not entirely sure. It feels like we covered a lot of things there. It could be a slightly longer one. So well done for holding on with us. But I think that you'll have got some tremendous value out of that. And if you feel like you haven't got enough value and you want to learn more about what to do with the value of your finances, that was a really smooth transition. I came up with that on the fly. Joe, how can people find you for some more direct advice as an actual client?
So I live on LinkedIn, basically. LinkedIn is the place to find me. I am trying to start Instagram. We're having, I'd say, not great success at the moment, but it's going all right.
That's the hardest bit.
It is.
It's the hardest bit.
Yeah.
So guys, if you're listening to this at all, whether or not you necessarily need Joe's help right now, or maybe you're going to need it in 10 years time when you've taken the plunge and you're super successful and you're wondering what you should have done with your money the whole time, let's be proactive. Let's follow Joe on Instagram. Don't worry, the handles are all going to be down in the bio for the podcast, and also attached to all of the social media clips that come out of the podcast, so you won't struggle to find him anywhere. Now, with that being said, I've already said it a couple of times, at mindsets_podcast is the social media handle. That works for literally everything. So if you found us and it's not that, then let me know, because that's not my account. But it's been fantastic having you guys with us here today. And I very, very much look forward to seeing you all in the next episode.